She thought finding the perfect apartment was a dream come true, until she discovered her midnight visitor had been waiting decades for someone exactly like her. Maya had been searching for the perfect apartment for 3 months. After countless viewings of cramped studios and overpriced rooms, she finally found something that felt right. The old Victorian house on Maple Street had character, with its tall windows and original wooden floors that creaked pleasantly underfoot. The landlord, Mrs. Rodriguez, showed her around the second-floor apartment with enthusiasm. The rooms were spacious and filled with natural light. The kitchen had vintage tile work, and the bathroom still had its original clawfoot tub. Everything about it felt perfect, almost too good to be true for the price. The last tenant left quite suddenly, Mrs. Rodriguez mentioned casually as they finished the tour. She'd lived here for about 6 months, then one day she just packed up and moved out. Didn't even give proper notice. Maya nodded, not thinking much of it. People had all sorts of reasons for sudden moves. Job changes, relationship issues, family emergencies. It happened all the time in the city. She signed the lease that same afternoon. Moving day went smoothly. Maya's friends helped her carry boxes up the narrow staircase, and by evening, she had the basics set up. Her bed was assembled, her clothes were hanging in the closet, and her small television was positioned perfectly in the living room corner. She ordered pizza and spent her first night in the new place feeling genuinely happy about her decision. The first week was everything she had hoped for. Maya worked from home as a freelance writer, and she set up her desk by the large window, overlooking the quiet street. The morning light was perfect for working, and the neighborhood was peaceful without being too isolated. She could walk to the corner store for groceries and catch the bus downtown when she needed to meet clients. Her routine quickly fell into place. She'd wake up around 7, make coffee in the vintage kitchen, and spend the morning writing. Afternoons were for errands or walks around the neighborhood. Evenings were quiet and relaxing, exactly what she needed after years of living with noisy roommates. But on the 8th night, something changed. Maya woke up suddenly, her heart racing for no reason she could identify. The digital clock next to her bed showed 3:17 a.m. She lay still, trying to figure out what had startled her awake. There had been no loud noise, no sirens from the street, nothing obvious that should have disturbed her sleep. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. The room felt occupied, not empty the way it should be in the middle of the night. She kept her eyes closed, afraid to look around. But the sensation grew stronger. Someone was watching her. Finally, she forced herself to open her eyes and look toward the window. The curtains were drawn, but moonlight filtered through the thin fabric, casting soft shadows across the room. For just a moment, she thought she saw something near the window. A darker shadow among the ordinary shadows, shaped like a person, standing perfectly still. Her heart hammered as she reached for the bedside lamp. The soft click seemed impossibly loud in the quiet room. Light flooded the space, revealing nothing unusual. Her dresser, her chair with tomorrow's clothes draped over it, her bookshelf against the wall. Everything exactly as she'd left it before. Maya sat up, scanning every corner of the room. Nothing. She must have been dreaming, or maybe she'd seen the shadow of tree branches moving outside. Old houses made strange shadows, she told herself. She was probably just adjusting to the new environment. She turned off the light and tried to go back to sleep, but it took over an hour. Every little sound the old house made seemed amplified. The settling of wooden beams, the distant hum of the refrigerator, the occasional car passing on the street below. Eventually exhaustion won, and she drifted off. The next night, it happened again. Same time, same sudden awakening, same feeling of being observed. This time she didn't see any shadows, but the sensation was even stronger. Someone was in the room with her. She could feel their presence as clearly as if they were breathing on her neck. Again, when she turned on the light, the room was empty. By the 4th night, Maya started to dread going to bed. She'd lie awake for hours, hyper-alert to every sound and movement. When she finally did fall asleep, she'd wake up at some point in the early morning hours with that same creeping feeling crawling up her spine. She began to hear things too. Soft footsteps in the hallway outside her bedroom, so quiet she almost convinced herself she was imagining them. The gentle creak of floorboards, as if someone were walking carefully, trying not to make noise. When she got up to investigate, pressing her ear to the bedroom door, the apartment was silent. During the day, everything seemed normal. The apartment was bright and welcoming, filled with the comfortable sounds of daily life. She could work without distraction, cook in the kitchen without feeling uneasy, and watch television in the evening without any strange sensations. It was only at night, in those deep, quiet hours when the rest of the world was sleeping, that something felt wrong. Maya started leaving more lights on when she went to bed. The bathroom light, the hallway light, even a small lamp in the living room. It helped a little, pushing back the shadows that seemed to gather in the corners of her vision. But it didn't stop the feeling of being watched, and it didn't stop those soft, careful footsteps in the hallway. She thought about calling Mrs. Rodriguez to ask about the building's history. But what would she say? That she felt like someone was watching her sleep? That she heard footsteps in an empty apartment? It sounded crazy even to her own ears. Maybe the previous tenant had left suddenly for the same reason. Maybe she'd experienced these same unsettling nights and decided she couldn't handle it anymore. The thought was both comforting and terrifying. Comforting because it meant Maya wasn't losing her mind, but terrifying because it meant something was actually happening. 3 weeks into her new life on Maple Street, Maya was beginning to wonder if she'd made a terrible mistake. The night everything changed started like any other. Maya had gotten into the habit of checking all the locks twice before bed, turning on the hallway light, and keeping her phone within easy reach on the nightstand. These small rituals made her feel more secure, even though she couldn't explain why she needed them. She'd been living in the apartment for almost a month now. The daytime hours were still wonderful. She loved her morning routine of coffee by the big window, watching people walk their dogs and head off to work. Her writing was going well, and she'd even started to make friends with Mrs. Chen, who ran the flower shop downstairs. But the nights remained difficult. That Tuesday evening, Maya had stayed up later than usual, working on a project that was due the next day. By the time she finished, it was almost midnight. She was exhausted, which she hoped might help her sleep more soundly. She brushed her teeth, changed into her pajamas, and settled into bed feeling genuinely tired for the first time in weeks. Sleep came quickly, deeper than it had in days. But around 2:30 a.m., that familiar feeling crept into her consciousness. Even in her sleep, she sensed it. The feeling of not being alone. This time, though, it was stronger than it had ever been before. Her body knew something was different before. Her mind fully woke up. Maya's eyes opened slowly, fighting against the heavy pull of sleep. The room was dimly lit by the streetlight outside, creating soft patterns of light and shadow on the walls. Everything looked normal at first glance. Her dresser, her chair, the stack of books on her bedside table. But then she saw her. At the foot of the bed stood a woman. Not a shadow this time, not a trick of the light or a half-dream vision. A real woman, clear as day, standing perfectly still about 6 feet away. Maya's breath caught in her throat. Her first instinct was to scream, but no sound would come. She felt paralyzed, every muscle in her body frozen with shock and fear. The woman wasn't threatening exactly, but she shouldn't exist. She shouldn't be there. The stranger was tall and thin, wearing what looked like an old-fashioned nightgown that reached almost to her ankles. The fabric was white or cream-colored, and it seemed to move slightly even though there was no breeze in the room. Her hair was long and dark, hanging loose around her shoulders, but it was her face that made Maya's heart race. The woman was looking directly at her with an expression that was both calm and unsettling. She wasn't angry or scary in an obvious way. Instead, she was smiling. A gentle, quiet smile that somehow felt more frightening than any angry expression would have been. There was something knowing in that smile, something possessive, like she was looking at something that belonged to her. The woman's eyes moved slowly around the room, taking in Maya's belongings, the furniture, the way the moonlight fell across the floor. Then her gaze returned to Maya, and the smile deepened, slightly. Maya tried to move, tried to reach for her phone or the bedside lamp, but her body wouldn't respond. She could only lie there, staring back at this impossible visitor who seemed completely comfortable in her bedroom. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours. The woman never moved from her spot at the foot of the bed, never stopped smiling that eerily peaceful smile. The strangest part was how solid she looked. This wasn't a transparent ghost from a movie. She had weight and presence, casting a shadow on the floor. Maya could see the details of her nightgown, the way her hair fell across one shoulder, even the pale color of her skin in the dim light. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the woman's image began to fade. Not disappear suddenly, but gradually become less solid, like morning fog slowly clearing. Her smile remained until the very end, the last thing to vanish into the darkness. Only when she was completely gone did Maya find she could move again. She sat up quickly, gasping for air she didn't realize she'd been holding. Her hands shook as she reached for the lamp switch, flooding the room with warm yellow light. She looked around frantically, checking every corner, but she was alone. The next morning, Maya called in sick to work. She couldn't concentrate on anything except what she'd seen. She spent hours online, searching for information about the house, the previous tenants, anything that might explain her midnight visitor. What she found made everything worse. The house had been built in 1924, and according to old newspaper archives, a woman named Catherine had lived in Maya's exact apartment from 1968 until 1994. Catherine had been a teacher at the local elementary school, well liked by her neighbors and students. She'd never married, living quietly by herself for over 25 years. But it was how Catherine died that made Maya's blood run cold. She'd passed away in her sleep, right there in the bedroom, in the very spot where Maya now slept every night. The newspaper article was brief, but mentioned that Catherine was found several days after her death, having died peacefully in bed. Maya stared at the old photograph accompanying the article. Catherine looked younger in the picture, probably taken when she first started teaching, but the face was unmistakable. The same long, dark hair, the same gentle features, the same quiet smile that had watched Maya from the foot of her bed. That evening, Maya sat in her living room, unsure what to do next. Moving wasn't financially possible right now, and part of her wondered if running away was even the answer. Catherine had seemed more curious than hostile, more lonely than dangerous. But the thought of facing another night with her unexpected visitor made Maya's stomach twist with anxiety. She considered staying awake all night, but she knew that wasn't sustainable. Eventually, she'd have to sleep, and when she did, she had a feeling Catherine would be waiting. After discovering Catherine's identity, Maya expected to feel more frightened. Instead, she found herself strangely calm. Knowing who her midnight visitor was somehow made the situation feel less threatening. Catherine had lived in this apartment for decades. In a way, it made sense that some part of her might still consider it home. The visits continued, but Maya began to notice patterns. Catherine appeared at different times, sometimes around midnight, other times closer to dawn. But she always stood in the same spot at the foot of the bed, always wearing that same cream-colored nightgown, always with that gentle, knowing smile. Maya started keeping a small notebook on her nightstand, jotting down details after each encounter. Time of appearance, how long Catherine stayed, anything different about her behavior. It helped her feel like she had some control over the situation, even if she didn't understand it. What surprised her most was how quickly she began to adapt. The first few nights after seeing Catherine clearly, Maya barely slept. But exhaustion eventually won over fear, and she found herself able to rest even when she sensed Catherine's presence in the room. Sometimes she'd wake up to find her there and simply nod in acknowledgement before rolling over and going back to sleep. It was during the third week of regular visits that Maya noticed Catherine wasn't just watching. She was rearranging things. First, the changes were subtle. Maya would wake up to find her coffee mug moved from the kitchen counter to the small dining table by the window. Her favorite book would migrate from the bedside table to the bookshelf, placed precisely between two other volumes. Her reading glasses, which she always left on the desk, would appear on the coffee table in the living room, These weren't random movements. Everything Catherine moved seemed to be placed with careful consideration, as if she had specific ideas about how the apartment should be organized. The coffee mug always ended up in a spot where the morning light would hit it perfectly. Books were arranged not just alphabetically, but by some system that somehow made the shelves look more balanced and inviting. Maya tested this theory by deliberately leaving things in what she considered the wrong places according to Catherine's preferences. Her coffee mug went back to the kitchen counter. Her book returned to the nightstand. By morning, they'd been moved again back to Catherine's preferred locations. It became a strange sort of communication. Maya would leave items in one place. Catherine would move them to another. After a few nights of this back and forth, Maya realized that Catherine's arrangements actually made the apartment feel more comfortable and organized. The woman had lived here for 25 years. Perhaps she really did know the best spots for everything. Gradually, Maya stopped moving things back. She started leaving her coffee mug on the dining table from the beginning, placing her books where Catherine seemed to prefer them. The midnight rearranging stopped, and Catherine's visits became more peaceful. Instead of the purposeful movements around the apartment that Maya sometimes heard at night, there was just the quiet presence and that familiar, gentle smile. Maya discovered that Catherine had other preferences too. One evening, she decided to play some music while cooking dinner. She'd put on a jazz playlist, something smooth and classic that seemed to fit the apartment's vintage feel. That night, Catherine appeared earlier than usual and stayed longer, standing not at the foot of the bed but near the old radio in the corner of the bedroom. Her expression was different that night. Instead of the usual contented smile, Catherine looked wistful, almost sad. She gazed at the radio with such longing that Maya felt her heart ache for the woman. Music had clearly meant something special to Catherine when she was alive. The next evening, Maya played the same jazz playlist, but softer this time, and she left the radio on low volume even after going to bed. When Catherine appeared that night, she stood by the radio again, but this time her smile had returned. She seemed genuinely happy, swaying slightly to the gentle rhythm of a saxophone melody. This became their new routine, jazz in the evenings, soft enough not to disturb the neighbors but loud enough for Catherine to enjoy. Maya found she liked it too. The music made the apartment feel warmer, more alive, even though one of its residents was technically no longer living. Maya also learned that Catherine preferred certain areas of the apartment to remain undisturbed. There was a wingback chair by the living room window that Maya had claimed as her reading spot, but she noticed Catherine always appeared there if Maya left any of her belongings on it overnight. After a few nights of having her things carefully relocated, Maya understood that the chair was Catherine's space. She started avoiding it in the evenings, leaving it empty and available. Sometimes when she woke up during Catherine's visits, she'd catch a glimpse of the chair and could swear she saw an indentation in the cushion, as if someone had just been sitting there. The arrangement worked surprisingly well. Maya had her spaces, Catherine had hers, and they shared the apartment in a way that felt almost natural. Friends who called noticed that Maya sounded more relaxed, less stressed about the move and her new living situation. She didn't mention her unique roommate, but she did talk about how much she loved the apartment's character and charm. Maya's work improved too. The apartment felt peaceful during the day, filled with creative energy that helped her writing flow more easily than it had in years. She met her deadlines with time to spare and even took on a few additional projects. The extra income was welcome, and it made her feel more secure about staying in the apartment long term. But as comfortable as their coexistence had become, Maya sometimes wondered if it was entirely healthy. She'd stopped having people over, partly because she didn't want to explain the apartment's quirks and partly because she'd grown protective of the peaceful atmosphere she and Catherine had created together. When her sister called to suggest a visit, Maya found herself making excuses. When her best friend from college wanted to crash on her couch for a weekend, Maya suggested a hotel instead. She told herself it was about privacy and wanting to keep her home space separate from her social life. But deep down, she knew it was more complicated than that. Catherine had been alone in this apartment for decades, and now Maya was beginning to understand why. There was something seductive about the quiet, controlled environment they'd created together. It was safe and predictable in a way that the outside world could never be. As autumn settled over the neighborhood and the days grew shorter, Maya realized she'd been living with Catherine for almost 3 months. What had started as a terrifying intrusion had evolved into the most peaceful living situation she'd ever experienced. But something about that realization worried her more than Catherine's midnight visits ever had. Maya had been living with Catherine for almost 5 months when her best friend Lisa started asking uncomfortable questions during their weekly phone calls. The conversations that used to flow easily now felt strained, filled with awkward pauses and half-hearted excuses. "You never want to hang out anymore," Lisa said during one particularly difficult call. "Remember when we used to have movie nights every Friday? Now you always have some reason why you can't meet up." Maya twisted the phone cord around her finger, looking out at the evening light filtering through her living room window. Catherine's chair sat empty beside her, waiting for its nightly occupant. The apartment felt so peaceful in these quiet hours before sunset, and the thought of leaving it to go out into the noisy, unpredictable world outside felt overwhelming. "I've just been really busy with work," Maya replied, which wasn't entirely untrue. Her writing was going better than ever in the calm environment she and Catherine had created together. And you know how it is when you first move somewhere new. It takes time to settle in. But even as she said it, Maya knew 5 months was plenty of time to settle in. The truth was more complicated. She'd tried having Lisa over for dinner about a month ago, and it had been a disaster. That evening had started normally enough. Maya had cooked Lisa's favorite pasta dish and opened a bottle of wine. They'd sat at the small dining table, catching up and laughing like old times. But as the sun set and evening turned to night, the apartment's atmosphere began to change. The temperature dropped noticeably, making both women reach for sweaters even though it was still warm outside. Lisa commented on the sudden chill, joking about old houses and poor insulation, but Maya knew better. Catherine didn't like strangers in her space, especially not in the evening hours when she usually had the apartment to herself. Things got worse as the night went on. The lights in the living room started flickering, and Lisa kept looking around nervously, claiming she felt like someone was watching them. Maya tried to ignore the signs, hoping Catherine would adjust to having a guest, but the oppressive feeling in the air only grew stronger. "This place gives me the creeps," Lisa finally said, standing up abruptly. "I'm sorry, Maya, but I need to go home. There's something really off about this apartment." After Lisa left, Catherine appeared in the bedroom earlier than usual, looking more solid and present than Maya had ever seen her. Her usual gentle smile was replaced by an expression of satisfaction, as if she was pleased that the intruder had been successfully driven away. Maya realized with growing horror that Catherine had deliberately made Lisa uncomfortable, using whatever supernatural abilities she possessed to reclaim her territory. That night, as Catherine stood in her usual spot at the foot of the bed, Maya felt a mix of emotions she couldn't quite sort out. Part of her was angry that Catherine had scared away her friend, but another part felt oddly grateful for the protection, for having someone who wanted to preserve their peaceful life together. The incident with Lisa wasn't isolated. Maya's sister called one weekend wanting to visit and see the new apartment. Maya found herself making excuse after excuse. Her brother suggested meeting for lunch downtown, but Maya claimed she was too busy with deadlines. Her co-workers invited her to happy hour, but she always had some reason why she couldn't join them. Slowly but surely, Maya's social circle began to shrink. Friends stopped calling as often when their invitations were repeatedly declined. Her family started to worry about her increasing isolation, but Maya brushed off their concerns with cheerful reassurances that she was just focused on her career. The strange thing was, Maya genuinely felt happier than she had in years. Her daily routine with Catherine was comfortable and predictable. She knew exactly how to arrange her belongings to keep Catherine content. She knew when to play jazz music and when to maintain silence. She understood which areas of the apartment were shared spaces and which were Catherine's alone. During the day when Catherine wasn't visible, Maya could still feel her presence. It was comforting. like having a roommate who never left dishes in the sink or played music too loudly. The apartment stayed organized exactly the way Maya liked it, because Catherine's preferences had somehow become her own. Maya's work thrived in this environment. She was meeting deadlines weeks early and taking on more clients than ever before. Her writing had gained a depth and focus it had never had when she was constantly distracted by social obligations and outside pressures. She told herself this isolation was temporary, just a phase while she built her career. But deep down, she knew she was lying to herself. She wasn't avoiding people because she was too busy. She was avoiding them because Catherine didn't like it when strangers invaded their carefully maintained peace. And Maya was beginning to realize she didn't like it either. The apartment had become a refuge from a world that suddenly seemed too loud, too chaotic, too unpredictable. Outside these walls, Maya had to worry about traffic and crowds and small talk and 1,000 little social interactions that drained her energy. Inside, everything was calm and ordered and safe. One evening in late autumn, Maya found herself standing at her window, watching people walk by on the street below. They looked so rushed and stressed, hurrying home from work or heading out to meet friends. She remembered when that had been her life too, always somewhere to go and someone to see. Now she spent her evenings reading in the living room, careful to avoid Catherine's chair, listening to soft jazz and feeling perfectly content with her own company. When Catherine appeared for her nightly visits, Maya no longer felt afraid or even particularly surprised. It was just part of her routine, as normal as brushing her teeth or making morning coffee. But that night, as she watched the busy world outside her window, Maya had a disturbing thought. She couldn't remember the last time she'd had a real conversation with another living person. Her interactions had become limited to brief exchanges with grocery store clerks and professional emails with clients. Even her phone calls with family had become short and superficial. She was living Catherine's life now. Isolated, content with solitude, protective of her personal space to the point of driving others away. The woman who had died alone in this apartment had somehow passed that same fate on to Maya, and Maya had accepted it willingly. The realization should have terrified her, but instead, it felt like something she'd always known. Catherine hadn't just claimed the apartment as her territory. She'd claimed Maya too. The breaking point came on a cold December evening when Maya realized she hadn't left the apartment in 4 days. She'd been ordering groceries online, conducting all her client meetings through video calls, and declining every invitation that came her way. The outside world had become foreign and uncomfortable, while Catherine's domain felt like the only place she truly belonged. That night, as she sat in her usual reading spot, Maya caught herself glancing at Catherine's empty chair and feeling lonely for the first time in months. She missed her midnight visitor during the long hours before Catherine appeared. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She was more connected to a woman who had been gone for decades than to any living person in her life. Something had to change. Maya spent the next few days researching everything she could find about Catherine's life, not just her death. She visited the local library, talked to longtime neighborhood residents, and even tracked down some of Catherine's former students who still lived in the area. What she discovered painted a picture that was both heartbreaking and familiar. Catherine had been engaged to be married in 1967, just before she moved into the apartment. Her fiancé, David, had been a music teacher at the high school. They'd planned a small wedding for the spring of 1968, but 3 weeks before the ceremony, David was killed in a car accident during a sudden snowstorm. According to neighbors who remembered those days, Catherine never recovered from the loss. She withdrew from her social circles, stopped attending community events, and rarely left the apartment except for work and essential errands. Her students loved her, but she maintained professional distance. She lived alone for 26 years, never dating again, never forming close friendships, slowly becoming more isolated with each passing year. The parallels to Maya's own situation were impossible to ignore. Catherine had retreated from life after losing someone she loved, just as Maya was retreating from life to maintain her connection with Catherine. It was a cycle of isolation that had been continuing for decades, with Catherine's spirit somehow passing her loneliness on to each new tenant who was sensitive enough to sense her presence. Armed with this knowledge, Maya made a decision that frightened her more than any of Catherine's midnight visits ever had. She was going to break the cycle, but not by moving away. She was going to help Catherine find peace, which meant risking their comfortable coexistence and facing the possibility of being truly alone. The next time Catherine appeared at the foot of her bed, Maya didn't pretend to be asleep. She sat up, slowly, her heart racing with nervousness, and looked directly into Catherine's familiar face. "I know who you are," Maya said softly. "I know about David, and I know why you never left this place." Catherine's expression changed for the first time in all the months Maya had known her. The gentle smile faltered, replaced by surprise and something that looked almost like fear. She took a step backward, becoming slightly less solid, as if the direct acknowledgement had weakened her connection to the physical world. Maya continued, her voice gaining strength. "You've been alone for so long that you don't remember how to let people close. But keeping me isolated like you were isolated isn't helping either of us. It's just making the loneliness last longer." Catherine's form wavered, becoming translucent around the edges. For a moment, Maya thought she might disappear entirely, but instead, Catherine moved closer to the bed, her expression shifting from fear to something that looked like desperate hope. "David is waiting for you," Maya whispered. "He's been waiting all these years for you to let go of this place and find him again. But you can't move on while you're trying to keep me here as a replacement for the life you never got to live." Tears began forming in Catherine's eyes, the first emotion other than contentment Maya had ever seen from her. Catherine looked around the room, taking in all the familiar objects and spaces she'd been guarding for so long. Then her gaze returned to Maya, and she nodded slowly, as if finally understanding something she'd been refusing to see. Over the next several nights, Catherine's visits changed completely. Instead of standing possessively at the foot of the bed, she would sit in the chair by the window, staring out at the street with a wistful expression. Sometimes Maya would wake to find Catherine by the old radio, but instead of the satisfied smile she used to wear while listening to jazz, she looked sad and distant, as if the music reminded her of everything she'd lost. Maya began reaching out to the people she'd been avoiding. She called Lisa and apologized for becoming so distant. She invited her sister for a visit, ignoring the cold spots that appeared when Catherine tried to discourage the intrusion. She even joined her co-workers for happy hour, forcing herself to leave the apartment despite Catherine's obvious displeasure. Each time Maya chose connection with the living world over Catherine's isolated existence, Catherine became a little less solid, a little less present. It was painful to watch, like seeing a friend slowly fade away, but Maya knew it was necessary for both of them. One snowy Thursday night in January, Maya woke to find Catherine standing by her bed one final time, but she wasn't alone. Next to her stood the translucent figure of a young man with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Maya somehow knew without being told that this was David, finally able to reach Catherine after decades of waiting. Catherine looked at Maya with an expression of profound gratitude. The possessive, territorial woman who had claimed the apartment as her eternal domain was gone, replaced by someone who looked peaceful and ready to let go. "Thank you," Catherine whispered, her voice barely audible but filled with genuine warmth. "I forgot how to love without holding on too tightly. You reminded me." Catherine took David's outstretched hand, and together they began to fade, not with the slow dissolution Maya had grown accustomed to, but with the gentle fading of morning light giving way to full day. Their figures became lighter and more ethereal, until they were gone completely, leaving behind only the sense of a long-held breath finally being released. For the first time in months, Maya slept through the entire night without waking. The apartment felt different when morning came, emptier but somehow more spacious. Catherine's chair by the window was just a chair now, no longer reserved for midnight visitors. The radio played only when Maya turned it on. Her coffee mug stayed, wherever she left it. Maya continued living in the apartment for another year, but it was truly her home now. She had friends over for dinner parties, hosted family gatherings, and even started dating someone she met through her work. The apartment welcomed all of them warmly, filled with life and laughter instead of protective isolation. Sometimes on quiet evenings when she played jazz music, Maya would think about Catherine and David and feel grateful for the strange lesson they'd taught her. Love wasn't about holding on so tightly that you stopped others from living their own lives. Real love meant caring enough to let go when it was time, trusting that the people you cared about would find their way to happiness, even if that happiness didn't include you. The night no longer belonged to loneliness and possessive spirits. It belonged to rest, to dreams, and to the peaceful sleep that comes from knowing you're connected to the world of the living in all the ways that truly matter.